It's traditional on the Sunday after Easter to read one of the post-resurrection accounts. This is year C, so we're still working with Luke. Next week, one of the post-resurrection accounts I'll be reading will be from John. But this week, the one from Luke. Now, on the same day refers to Easter. Now, on the same day, this is Luke 24, the last chapter of Luke. This is the same day as the resurrection, okay? Now, on the same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all of the things that had happened. While they were walking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" When they stood still, looking sad, and then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" And he asked them, "What things?" And they replied, "Well, the things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive." Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him. And then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all of the prophets, he interpreted to them the scriptures about himself in all of the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. And when he was at table with them, he took bread. He blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. And they said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour, they got up and they returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. And they were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." And then these 2 disciples told what had happened on the road and how he had been known to them in the breaking of the bread. Thus ends the reading of the word. You know, this story, the Emmaus story, is one of my most special and particular favorites because it is the story that led me into being a narrative preacher. It is the story that brought me into writing stories about Scripture. Now, those of you who regularly come to the Good Friday services are very well aware of how I write stories based on Scripture. I had 3 new ones this year, and I had 5 new ones last year, and this was the very first passage of Scripture that I wrote a story on back in 1986. And it happened when I was doing research on this particular story. And the research that one is trained to do in seminary, other than reading the original language, Greek. Trying to read the original Greek. Other than doing work, maybe word studies on the original language, but also we do who, what, where, why, when. Who, what, yeah. Who, what, why, when, where. Who, what, why, when, where. The 5 W's. So we do the exploration on where this is taking place, what is happening, who's participating in it. So one of the first questions that I asked of the text was, where's Emmaus? Now, you all love when I do maps. So I'll do a map today. But I have to tell you, when I did the research, there was nothing about an archaeological location for Emmaus. There were some who said, well, here's Jerusalem. Okay? Jerusalem. Okay, so it's either 30 miles north of Jerusalem in the Judean mountains, the vineyard territory, or it's south of Jerusalem, about 7 miles south. Now, if any of you were here on Good Friday, I talked about Emmaus again, and I picked the Emmaus that was believed to be in the Judean mountains north of Jerusalem. That's where Myra came from, where her husband had a vineyard. So today, just picture, okay, here's Emmaus, here, all right? Now, we have 2 people who are leaving town. They're leaving Jerusalem. Now, this isn't out of the ordinary because this is the first day of the week, not the Sabbath. The first day of the week is Sunday. And on the first day of the week, the holy period, Passover, is over. So people are going to be on their way home. Now, I asked a friend of mine, I said, here are these 2 people who were disciples of Jesus, and suggestive in this particular passage that one of them was one of the 12. Maybe. I think he was like a second-tier disciple. That's funny. We're 2,000-tier disciples. Okay. So the disciples, these 2 disciples are leaving town. Now, I asked an Episcopal priest friend of mine, I said, John, where were they going? What was Emmaus? And John said, well, they're going home. And I said, oh, come on. That's not the least bit imaginative. They can't be going home. There must be something in Emmaus. As they are leaving town, I had to imagine these 2. One is Cleopas and the other one is unnamed. Now, oftentimes in Scripture, with the exception of Luke names a lot of women. But a lot of times in Scripture, the unnamed are, I just gave the answer to you. The unnamed are women. So there's only one mention of Cleopas, and he's not even in the list, in Luke's list in chapter 6. He's not even included in the list of the 12. So who is Cleopas, and where did he come from? What level of disciple is he? Who's he attached to? Well, it's interesting. In John's Gospel, there's a Clopas. And Clopas is mentioned as the husband of Mary. How many Marys are there that are disciples? It was a good guess. But you haven't heard my sermons. There are like 6. 6 Marys. Mary, the mother of James and John, Mary, the sister of Martha, Mary, the mother of Jesus, Mary of Magdala, Mary, the wife of Cleopas, and the other Mary. There's always another Mary. So there are like 6 Marys. So this Mary may be the wife of Cleopas, and she may be the one who is the disciple. Just he gets his name mentioned. Anyway, so the who. We have Cleopas and somebody else leaving town. Now, are they running? Or good? Wouldn't you be just a tad nervous? Come on! Wouldn't you be just a tad? Did you hear Jesus is raised from the dead? And what happened on the day that he was crucified? We were all standing. Don't you think they might be? You know, I don't know if I want to see it. I don't know if I want to be face to face with Jesus. It was not a pleasant time. So maybe they're leaving town, like getting out of town. And maybe Emmaus is like, you know, the hole in the wall village. Am I speaking a foreign language? Don't you remember in the cowboy stories, the hole in the wall gang? Those people who had that special place where they went and hid? Okay. So Emmaus might be that place where people go to hide. We don't know. But you know what? It doesn't exist anymore, and nobody knows where it is. Where, what, who, when. The same day as the resurrection. They are walking on their way, and they are greeted by this person they don't recognize. Well, last week I preached to you from Paul's letter to the Corinthians, right? And what did I talk to you about? Paul talked about spiritual bodies. He talked about how we are changed, how we will all be changed. And he said, we have the body that is our earthen body, and when we die, we have our spiritual body. So I figured Jesus has put on a spiritual body, and that's how come they can't recognize him, okay? So they're walking, and the spiritual body, newly clothed Jesus, comes up and starts talking to them. And they're astounded that there's one person who has no idea of the chaos that reigned in Jerusalem over the weekend. But the key phrase in this wonderful story for me is when they realize that while they are listening to him expound upon the scripture, while he is elucidating the scripture for them, they are moved and changed inside. In Judaism, there are two forms of interpreting scripture that are called midrash. The Halakha and the Haggadah midrash. When I wrote my doctoral project, I wrote, the title of it was Hope for a New Midrash. The kind of midrash that I write, or the kind of story that I wrote, is a Haggadah midrash. That is, it is a homiletical, interpretive story on Scripture that seeks to open up your understanding of the message of the Scripture. Now, there was no way I could read to you the story of Emmaus today. It's in my book, but it's horribly long. So you just have to take the book out of the library and read it. Okay? The book is called New Life for the Old Story. Okay? It's purple, of course. With a gold on the binding. There are a couple of copies in the library. So if you want to read the Emmaus story and what I came up with when I developed my Haggadah midrash on the story of Emmaus so that people might have an understanding of what that could mean for them. Today, this is a sacramental story. Today, Luke lifts up the most important thing in his gospel today. The most important thing for us to know and for us to remember, and that is the presence of the Christ in the breaking of the bread. These two disciples, Cleopas and Mary, probably, as they came to Emmaus, as they had been enthralled with everything the stranger said to them, invited him to stay, invited him to be their guest at dinner. And when he invited them to be their guest, he came to the table and he immediately took the bread and he blessed it and he broke it and he gave it to them. He blessed it, he broke it, and he gave it to them. In that moment, their eyes were opened because they were there when Jesus did that for 5,000 people. They were present and they witnessed when Jesus blessed the bread and broke the bread and gave it to the 5,000. They were there. They were present. They were witnesses when Jesus took the bread, blessed the bread, broke the bread, and gave it to them at the final supper just the week before. And in that moment, these two suddenly realized who the guest was. And in that moment, he was gone. Luke wants us to remember. Luke wants us to know. Finally, and in all things, the Christ is with us, and the Christ is present with us in the blessing, in the breaking, in the receiving,